Brooksville was the kind of place people dreamed of raising their families in. It sat tucked away between rolling hills and endless stretches of farmland, the kind of town where the loudest sound you heard at night was the hum of crickets or the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. Houses lined the streets with perfectly trimmed lawns, porches decorated with flower pots, and American flags gently waving in the breeze. Generations of families had lived there, each one convinced that Brooksville was the safest place in the world. People took comfort in the routine of their lives, where everyone greeted each other by name at the grocery store, and the postman stopped to chat instead of rushing through his route. The idea of danger seemed like something that only happened in distant cities, never here. It was late October when everything began to change. The leaves had just started to turn a fiery orange, and the town was preparing for its annual harvest festival, one of the most anticipated events of the year. Kids decorated pumpkins, parents baked pies for the contest, and the town square buzzed with excitement. No one could have imagined that underneath all that cheer, something unimaginable was quietly unfolding. Emily Carter, a 22-year-old college student, had returned home for the weekend to spend time with her family. Emily was bright, responsible, and well-loved by everyone who knew her. She spent her Friday evening at the town library, working on a research paper before the weekend festivities. When Emily didn't come home that night, her parents initially thought she had stayed with a friend or fallen asleep at the library. By morning, their worry grew into panic. The library staff confirmed she had left just before closing, carrying her books and heading toward the parking lot. Her car was later discovered abandoned on a desolate stretch of road, the driver's door still ajar as if she had stepped out in a hurry. Her purse remained on the front seat, untouched, which made the scene all the more unsettling. Brooksville wasn't a place where things like this happened. The idea of someone vanishing without a trace was unthinkable. Neighbors gathered at the Carter family's home, offering support and searching for explanations that made sense. Some suggested she might have run away under the pressures of school. Others whispered about the possibility of an accident in the woods. But those who knew Emily well were certain she wasn't the type to disappear willingly. Search parties were quickly organized, with volunteers combing through fields and forests, calling her name as they carried flashlights and dogs to help in the hunt. Days passed with no sign of her, each hour making the situation more dire. For the first time in decades, fear settled over Brooksville. Parents stopped letting their children play outside after dark. People locked their doors, something they had rarely done before. The once cheerful town was suddenly gripped by unease, shadows seeming darker than they had before, and silence at night feeling heavier. What no one realized then was that Emily's disappearance was not a random tragedy. It was the beginning of something far more sinister that would unravel everything they thought they knew about safety, trust, and the true face of evil. 3 days after Emily vanished, the quiet of Brooksville shattered when a hiker stumbled upon something deep in the woods just beyond the town's border. At first glance, it looked like discarded clothing, bright fabric half hidden under a pile of leaves. But as the hiker approached, the truth became horrifyingly clear. It was Emily. Her body was carefully placed on the ground as though she had been laid there intentionally, not abandoned in haste. The sight was haunting, unnaturally calm, almost staged, and the longer investigators studied the scene, the more disturbing it became. Word spread quickly, and the town fell into shock. Brooksville had never dealt with a crime of this magnitude. Police cars lined the dirt road leading to the woods, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow against the trees. Detectives and forensic teams swarmed the area, careful not to disturb the strange arrangement of Emily's body. Beside her lay her necklace, a hairbrush, and a notebook, all set neatly in a row as if someone had wanted them displayed. It was not the chaotic mess of a violent struggle. Instead, it was deliberate, almost ritualistic, and that realization left investigators uneasy. Whoever had done this hadn't simply wanted to kill. There was a message here, though no one yet understood it. The medical examiner's report deepened the mystery. Emily had not been subjected to the usual signs of assault that investigators expected. There were no broken bones, no defensive wounds, and no evidence of a fight. It was as though she had been taken by surprise, rendered powerless in an instant. Even more chilling, the cause of death was precise and clinical, the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The absence of chaos spoke volumes. It was the work of a calculated mind, not a crime of opportunity. The police department faced enormous pressure as fear gripped the town. Reporters arrived from neighboring cities, their headlines feeding the growing panic. Brooksville was no longer the idyllic safe haven it once seemed. People began to question everything. Was this the act of a stranger passing through, or had the killer been among them all along? The fact that Emily's belongings had been arranged so carefully suggested a familiarity, a personal element, as though the murderer wanted her to be remembered in a certain way. But why? As detectives combed through her life, interviewing friends, family, and classmates, nothing stood out. Emily was loved, respected, and had no known enemies. Her life was ordinary, uncomplicated, making the brutality of her death even harder to comprehend. The absence of a clear motive left the case wide open, and the lack of forensic evidence gave the killer an invisible presence, like a shadow that moved unseen. Meanwhile, fear changed the rhythm of the town. Streets that were once lively emptied out at night. Strangers were viewed with suspicion, and every creak of a floorboard or flicker of movement outside a window sparked paranoia. Brooksville had lost its innocence, and the sense of safety that once defined it was gone. Yet as devastating as Emily's murder was, investigators had only uncovered the surface of something much darker. Her death was not an isolated act of violence, but a chilling thread connected to a larger, hidden pattern that no one in Brooksville was prepared to face. As investigators struggled to piece together the details of Emily Carter's death, a disturbing realization began to emerge. While reviewing cold cases from nearby towns, detectives noticed haunting similarities. Files that had long been closed, marked down as missing persons or accidents, suddenly seemed to align with the same chilling pattern. Victims from different places, spanning nearly 5 years, were found in isolated areas, posed with their belongings arranged neatly beside them. The moment the connections became clear, the scope of the horror widened far beyond Brooksville. Emily had not been the first. She was part of something much larger. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigative team. Cases that had been gathering dust were pulled back into the light. In one town just 30 miles away, a young man had been discovered in a deserted field, his backpack set beside him, untouched. In another, a mother of 2 had vanished during her morning jog, later found at the edge of a forest with her running shoes placed carefully at her side. At the time, each of these deaths had seemed isolated, tragic but unrelated. Now, when viewed together, they formed a terrifying pattern too precise to be coincidence. The more cases detectives uncovered, the clearer it became that they were dealing with someone who had been operating undetected for years. This was no impulsive criminal. The killer's actions were methodical, controlled, and chillingly patient. Each crime scene carried the same haunting signature, as though the murderer wanted their work to be recognized but not understood. The victims were different ages, genders, and backgrounds, which made establishing a motive even harder. There was no single type, no obvious reason these individuals had been chosen. That randomness made the killer even more dangerous because it meant no one could predict who might be next. Brooksville's residents followed the news updates with growing dread. The thought that Emily's death might be part of a series of murders ignited fear like the town had never known. Parents kept children inside long past dusk. Neighbors who had once trusted one another began locking doors and peeking out windows, watching for anything that seemed unusual. Every stranger who passed through town became a suspect in whispered conversations. Some residents refused to believe it was the work of a local, clinging to the idea that the killer was an outsider. Others quietly wondered if the person responsible had been walking among them all along, blending into the very fabric of their community. For detectives, the most unsettling part of the pattern was how easily it had gone unnoticed. Dozens of officers in different towns had seen the evidence, but no one had ever connected the dots until now. The killer had taken advantage of small-town complacency, counting on each community to treat the crime as an isolated tragedy. That strategy had worked flawlessly for years, keeping the truth hidden in plain sight. Now that the pattern was exposed, the question became how long the murderer had been preparing for their next move. In the weeks following Emily's discovery, investigators raced against time, poring over old files, revisiting crime scenes, and interviewing families still haunted by unanswered questions. Each detail added another layer of dread. The precision, the ritual, the complete absence of evidence. It all suggested a killer who not only knew what they were doing but took pride in staying invisible. Brooksville, once defined by its calm predictability, was suddenly living under the shadow of something far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined, a predator who had been hunting for years, and who had not yet been stopped. The investigation into Emily's death and the series of similar murders had reached a standstill until a small, overlooked detail broke the case wide open. Detectives reviewing hours of grainy security footage from the gas station near where Emily's abandoned car had been found noticed a familiar face in the background. It wasn't a stranger passing through town or a drifter who could disappear without a trace. It was Richard Hale, a respected high school teacher who had lived in Brooksville for years. He was not only a familiar figure in the community, but also one of its most trusted. Parents praised his patience, students admired his guidance, and colleagues described him as dedicated and reliable. The sight of his face on that footage didn't immediately make sense, but it was enough to warrant a closer look. Detectives quietly began digging into Richard's life, and what they found quickly unraveled the carefully crafted image he had built. On the surface, Richard was the model citizen. He attended every town event, coached the debate team, and often volunteered at community gatherings. Yet beneath that facade were cracks that only appeared once investigators probed deeper. His colleagues recalled odd habits, his students mentioned moments when his friendliness felt uncomfortably intense, and his neighbors remembered late nights when his light stayed on long after everyone else had gone to bed. None of it proved anything sinister on its own, but together these details painted a picture of a man who lived two lives. The turning point came when police obtained a warrant to search his home. At first glance, his house appeared ordinary, neatly kept, with stacks of graded papers on the desk and bookshelves lined with literature. But hidden beneath that normality was something far more disturbing. In the basement, officers discovered a locked room concealed behind a false wall. Inside was a space that felt untouched by time, cold and suffocating, filled with items that should never have been there. There were notebooks stacked high, each one filled with meticulous handwriting documenting thoughts, observations, and details about the victims. Maps of Brooksville and surrounding towns were pinned to the walls, marked with red circles where bodies had been discovered. And most chilling of all, there were boxes containing personal belongings of the dead, bracelets, photographs, scraps of clothing, collected like trophies. The basement told the story Richard had kept hidden for years. He had been watching, planning, and recording his crimes with obsessive detail. His outward life as a trusted teacher had been nothing more than a mask, one that allowed him to move through the community without suspicion. The very people who trusted him most had unknowingly given him the perfect cover. When Richard was arrested, the town's disbelief was overwhelming. Parents who had entrusted their children to him felt betrayed in ways words couldn't describe. Neighbors who had waved at him on their morning walks now recoiled in horror. The realization that the killer had been living among them, teaching their children and sharing their sidewalks, left Brooksville shaken to its core. It was no longer a mystery hiding in the shadows. The predator had a face, and it was one they had trusted all along. Richard Hale's arrest shook Brooksville in a way nothing ever had before. The man once celebrated for shaping young minds and volunteering at school events now stood accused of being the very monster who had stolen the town's sense of safety. The trial that followed drew attention from across the state, filling the courthouse with reporters, grieving families, and townspeople desperate to understand how such evil could have been hiding in plain sight. Every day, new details emerged that painted a picture more horrifying than the last, each revelation leaving the community stunned and heartsick. During the proceedings, prosecutors laid out the evidence collected from Richard's home. The notebooks were presented first, page after page of chilling entries describing his victims not as people, but as pieces of a larger puzzle he believed he was creating. He wrote of them in detached language, carefully documenting their routines, weaknesses, and the exact moments he decided they would be chosen. He described their deaths with clinical precision, noting how he posed them afterward and why he placed certain items beside them. It was not rage or impulse driving him, it was something far colder. He saw himself as an artist, and his victims were his unwilling subjects. The families of the murdered listened through tears as these writings were read aloud. Each word felt like salt in an open wound, erasing any hope that Richard might have felt remorse. His own demeanor in the courtroom only deepened the horror. He sat calmly, hands folded, watching without visible guilt or sorrow. To him, the trial seemed less a punishment and more an opportunity to showcase his work. When asked why he had done it, Richard explained in chilling clarity that he wanted to preserve what he called perfect silence. The arrangements of the bodies, the neat rows of personal belongings, were his attempt to create order from life's chaos. He believed he was elevating his victims into something greater, even as he stripped them of their lives. The jury took little time to deliver their verdict. Richard Hale was found guilty on multiple counts of murder, and the judge sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole. Yet even with justice served, the scars left behind were deep. The families were left to mourn not only the lives lost but also the innocence stolen from their community. Brooksville would never again be the same quiet town it once was. Its streets, once symbols of safety and familiarity, now carried a permanent shadow. Every classroom Richard once taught in, every field where he once stood during school events, became a reminder of how easily darkness can hide behind a mask of respectability. For the people of Brooksville, the most unsettling truth was not only what Richard had done but how long he had gone unnoticed. He had lived among them, earning their trust, while secretly building a world of horror beneath his home. The realization forced them to question everything they thought they knew about the people around them. If someone as respected as Richard Hale could commit such unspeakable acts, then who else might be hiding behind a carefully constructed smile? The question lingered long after the trial ended, ensuring that the story of Brooksville's shocking murderer would never truly fade from memory. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more chilling true crime stories, make sure to hit the like button. It really helps us bring you more content. Don't forget to subscribe to Crime Uncovered and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. Stay safe and stay curious.